Hi, this is Alex from Voyage. One of the questions that we get a lot when we're assisting our clients with pre-approvals or with purchases is about the offer process. Obviously, you're spending a lot of money, it's pretty high stakes. There's sometimes a bit of pressure from the agent as well. So what I'd like to do is to walk you through the offer process to make sure that you are confident and really clear about what's going to happen. What I've produced here is just a standard REWA offer and acceptance form. So this is for WA purchases only. If you're purchasing over East, then there'll be a separate video, or just ask us about that separately. This is for WA purchases only. Let's get stuck in and I'll show you what to do to make sure that your offer is properly structured. Okay, so the right offer is really made up of three components, three areas, roughly sequential in timeline and split up into what happens before the offer, the actual offer process and negotiation, and then what happens once that offer is accepted. So that's split up into being prepared, so having good preparation, making sure then once you're out in the market and you do find a property that the offer and negotiation is structured and conducted properly. And then the third is everything that happens after the offer acceptance. So getting finance approved, building inspections, settlements, etc. Just to put that in a bit more of a clearer timeline, what I'm wanting to talk about is getting finance and knowledge ready, and I'll talk more about that shortly. But that's the first thing, is making sure that we've got our ducks lined up. We know what our maximum borrowing capacities are. We know what is going on in the market. And just as importantly, we know our end outcome. And I'll talk about this a little bit more shortly. Number two is then getting out in the market and then finding a property that you're interested in making an offer on. Three is expressing interest in that property. So that's obviously you found a nice property, you're wanting to make an offer, you talk to the agent in charge, and they will then start talking to you about making an offer. Now, something that may happen before you actually put together a formal offer, and I will walk through what that looks like, is that the agent may ask for a single page expression of interest document. It's basically something that agents will quite often do in a hot market when there's lots and lots of offers going in, and I'll explain what that looks like, why they do that shortly. Next is the offer negotiation and acceptance and the procedures, what a formal offer looks like. Then the finance approval, and then the settlement, which is when you get to pick up the keys and move into your property. So let's just move back over here. I just want to talk a little bit about just being prepped, because one of the problems that we often find is that people come to us with a lack of clarity and a lack of decisiveness about what they're trying to achieve. Now, the lack of clarity, I'm hoping by the time you're watching this video, you're pretty clear. We've talked about finance. We've talked about whether a pre-approval is right for you. It's important to note here as well that sometimes pre-approvals maybe are not necessary. They're not the right way forward. It could be because you're not ready to do anything for another 5 or 6 months. It could be because the market is moving quite quickly. It could be because we're very certain, after having a chat to one of your Voyage brokers, we're very certain about your ability to gain finance, and so it's just not necessary. Maybe there's a variety of reasons, but actually having a pre-approval is not always necessary. Sometimes what we can do instead, if we don't think a pre-approval is necessary, but we do think that an agent would like confirmation that if you're making an offer, you haven't just walked in off the street after seeing a for sale sign and started punting offers on properties, is putting together a letter of confidence, or like a finance letter prepared by us on our letterhead that basically says to the agent, these guys are good for it. We've talked them through the offer process. We've had a look at their finance. We've had a look at their income documents. We're completely comfortable with them making an offer on a property. And quite often that will also involve an invitation to actually call us, and that often will tip us over the edge in terms of determining from the agents and the vendor's perspective who gets that property, which offer they accept. So number one is good preparation. Definitely, of course, includes getting finance sorted, not necessarily a pre-approval, but understanding what your limits are, understanding what those repayments look like. The parts of the preparation that a lot of people don't really think about, though, are the market conditions and then actually knowing what your end goal is. Obviously, understanding whether you're purchasing an investment property or an owner-occupied property is pretty basic, pretty important. What we find, though, is a lot of people, especially in a hot market, they will go in expecting to be able to lowball properties and to be able to negotiate on offers, and that in a hot market just does not occur. So in a market that is rapidly rising, you really need to make sure that you are putting your best offer forward, because you can imagine it from the agent and the vendor's perspective. The agent doesn't have time to be sifting through the 5 or 6 offers that have gone in on a property, they don't have the time to be negotiating with every single one of those people, especially if they've got 3 or 4 properties on the go as well. So from the agent's perspective, they are wanting to make their client, i.e. the seller of the property, also known as the vendor, and I'll be referring to vendors from now on. They are legally obligated to make the vendor the most money. However, they also just want to make as much money as they can. They're just trying to sift through and get offers accepted as quickly as possible so that they can move on to the next sale. So an agent, unless it's a pretty quiet market, in which case they might be talking to you quite a bit more, they might be more willing to accept a lowball offer. Most often than not, they're just trying to move on to the next property. And so going in with a lowball offer and then thinking that the agent is going to negotiate with you is usually, I won't say usually, but often not a great strategy, as I said, especially in a rising market. What this leads to is that, and we've had this happen time and time again, people miss out on properties. We've had clients that they lowball offer thinking that they're going to get a property and they just don't secure it. They continually miss out on properties, and what then ends up happening is that they're having to pay another 5 or 10%. This is over potentially a span of years because they just keep on lowballing. They keep on lowballing, and then they have to pay an extra 5 or 10% for the property that they would have got much cheaper had they just made the right offer initially. Understanding and knowing your end goal. If your end goal is to buy an owner-occupied property, you're not planning to sell it for the next 15, 20 plus years, then potentially paying a little bit over on that property really doesn't matter. If you're paying what you think at the time is, we'll put it like this, if you think you're overpaying a little bit at the time, but you're not planning to sell that property for a long time, if you've paid an extra couple of percent, it really doesn't matter. One of the big secrets in property is that we can send 2 or 3 or 4 different valuers out to the same property with a simple instruction to value the property. And it is not uncommon at all for those valuers to come back with a 4, 5, we've even seen as high as a 10% differential in the values that they've given the same property. We have to do this if we're doing a refinance. We might get a couple of valuers out, and again, it's not uncommon for us to see, and these are trained valuers. They've got to go to university, they've got like the proper tools, they've got all the right training. Still, they will not be able to agree on the correct price for a property. So I'll often reflect this to clients to say, if a valuer is not going to be able to determine to the absolute dollar the value of a property, you can't either. So if it's going to mean an extra $2,000, $4,000, $10,000, $20,000, another couple of percentage points to get you into that property, and it's the right property for you, and you're planning to stay there for a long time, and you're not planning to sell, like, you're not actually overpaying for that property really at all. And a valuer is not going to be any more accurate than what you think that property is worth. So knowing your end goal is really important, because we do not want you to be missing out on properties and then having to pay another 10% 2 years down the track while renting at the same time for that same type of property, because the market has moved and now you're having to redo pre-approvals, you're having to try and get an increase, you're having to put more money aside. So knowing your end goal, having good preparation is really important. All right, let's move on to the offer and negotiation process. We want to make sure, obviously, that you're, having just said, sometimes overpaying is okay. Obviously, we don't want you to massively overpay for a property, and we don't want you to miss out. So this is a bit of a dance, right? We've got to make sure that we're not overpaying, but be willing to overpay a little bit if we know what our end goal is, i.e. if we're willing to stay in that property, we know that we're going to be there for a couple of years. So let's assume you're now out in the market, you're having a look at properties, you're going to view home opens. Hopefully you go and see 4, 5, 6 properties, and you start to get a bit of a sense of how much competition there is for the market segment that you're looking at in the particular area or the suburb, that price range, the number of bedrooms and bathrooms. One thing that's really important to mention here as well, actually, is that sometimes people will massively overpay for a property if that property suits their specific circumstances. So I was talking to a client 8 months ago, and they were talking about a property that they really wanted, but they got outbid on by quite a significant margin. And they were trying to understand what had happened, what had gone wrong, and talking to the client and having a look at the property, we actually discovered that we knew this already, but there was a granny flat out the back. And so someone was obviously willing to pay in that suburb significantly over what the property would otherwise have been worth for that granny flat out the back. And that could have been, we don't know the reason, but it could have been for any number of reasons. Maybe they had an elderly parent that was going to be moving in. Maybe they had a teenager who needed just their own space out the back. Maybe they had a disabled child who was becoming an adult and they just wanted to be able to keep an eye on that person, but then for them to also have their own sort of independent, separate space. Sometimes people will outbid you, and maybe there's a specific reason for that particular property, and that's just something you have got to accept and try to understand why particular properties might be outliers in the suburbs that you're looking at. But having a look at 5 or 6 properties, understanding what's going on, trying to get a bit of a feel for the competition and the number of offers that are going in on the properties that you're interested in and the suburbs that you're interested in, really important. And that ties into the market conditions as well. The next thing to talk about is agent tactics. Agent tactics will vary depending on the competition. Sometimes they'll put in an actual price. We just want to sell this property for $1 million. Sometimes they'll put in a price range. Increasingly, they will actually just put in nothing at all. Particularly for properties towards the higher end, they are probably just going to put in offers. And then it's up to you and it's up to us to try and figure out, like, where does this property lie? Because they're just trying to extract as much as they can out of the market, as is their right. So this is something to talk through with your broker. I might even put together a separate video talking about some of the actual tactics that they'll use. But typically, it starts with that price that you see on realestate.com.au or Domain, wherever you're looking. It starts there. Usually it's offers, sometimes it's a window, sometimes it's a set date sale, sometimes it's an actual auction, sometimes it's an online auction. We're finding in WA they're becoming increasingly popular. And that's just a way to extract as much out of the market as possible while taking as little of the risk as possible, because live auctions are inherently risky. So let's now make the assumption that you've gone to view a couple of properties, you know what you're wanting to offer, you find a property, the agent says, yep, not a drama at all. They will either give you a 1-page expression of interest. I don't actually have an example of that, but what I will tell you is that 1-page expression of interest is a shortening, a condensing of this document here, which is the official contract for sale or land in Western Australia. The document that you'll formally accept that you'll formally put together for the actual formal offer will look very similar to this. It might have their logo up the top. There'll be general conditions and annexures and other bits and pieces attached to it. But what you may find is, as I said, you're asked to put together a 1-page expression of interest. That will have your names, that will have the property that you're wanting to purchase, it will have the amount that you're actually wanting to offer, it'll have the settlement date, so just all the most really important information. You're able to submit that document to them. That is not a formal offer, that is just you just saying, yeah, this is what we're wanting to pay, this is how long it's going to take us to get finance. And what the agent may do, especially if it's a hot market, is, because putting this document together takes a little bit of time, there's quite a bit to do. And there's this plus others, it's not just this document. This is the main one. But if the agent has got 5 or 6 offers on the property, then what they're likely to do is just say, look, just fill out this 1-pager. And then from there, the agent and the vendor may select 2 or 3 offers to make formal. The information that you actually put down on both those documents, though, are going to be pretty much the same. So let's go through this. The first thing that you're going to need to do is put your full name as per your passport or birth certificate in here. So full name and address. It's really important that we do have your full name as per your passport. If it's not correct and we do need finance, then the bank is just going to ask us to amend it. So we've got to make sure that the full name is as per the legal documents that we're submitting to the bank and to the conveyancer as well. And if you don't want to know what a conveyancer is, I'll explain. Okay, so that's the first thing to put in. Hopefully, if the agent is good, they're actually filling this out for you, because this really should be the agent's job. But as I said, if they're busy, sometimes they don't do it. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do is to make sure that the property address is listed in here and the volume and folio. Now, again, the agent should put this in for you, especially this part here, because you're not going to know what the volume and folio numbers are. They're just an identifying marker with the state government so that they know exactly what property that is actually being sold. Lot, whatever, deposited survey, all that you can pretty much ignore. The agent should handle it all for you. And this may be just a verbal back and forth. The agent may just ask you this stuff and they will actually fill this out for you, or they may ask you to put it together in an expression of interest and then they'll do this document up for you. Further on down, we've got a deposit. Now, this deposit is not the entire deposit that we talk to you about when you're making an offer on a property. We may say when you're purchasing a property and your maximum is, let's say, $1 million, you've got $100,000 to put in. That deposit is not this deposit. This deposit is an amount to be deposited within typically 3 to 4 to 5 working days of the offer being accepted. It's to be held, as you can see here, in the real estate agent's trust account, and they will fill that amount out. The purpose of this deposit is to effectively show good faith that you are intending to do your best to get finance approved. So it's just a show of good faith. And it's really important actually that I note here that this is a legally binding document, and pretty much the first clause in this document is that you will use your best efforts to get finance. So it's really important that if you're signing this offer, you are serious about the offer, and importantly as well, that you're not making more than one offer, i.e. you don't have 2 of these documents live at the same time. If both of them get accepted, then we're in all sorts of trouble. So make sure that it's just one document at a time. We can put sunset clauses and other stuff in if you're wanting to make offers on 2 properties, but only one of these documents should be live, and you should only have one offer in on a property at a time. Back to the deposit though, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000. Usually the more competitive the market, the higher, and the more expensive the property, the higher this deposit amount is going to be. But as I said, it's not the full deposit. It is only a sum to reflect that you are serious about getting finance approved for the property. If your offer is accepted and we go to settlement, then the $5,000 or whatever amount we put in here will just come off what you owe on the date of settlement, and it'll form part of the entire deposit that you put down. If we can't get finance approved for whatever reason, then this amount is refundable. So you do get it back. If we can't get finance approved, we produce a decline letter, you do get this money back. But it's important that you don't want to put down your full 10 or 20% deposit in here. Number one, because you're missing out on a little bit of interest. But number two, then you're potentially risking that money just in case something does go wrong. We'd prefer to have that money in your account rather than sitting out of your control in someone else's account. Okay. So the next important part is the purchase price. This is the amount that typically your Voyage broker has discussed with you or that you've researched, but that amount goes in here. If the offer is, and this is the amount that typically, this goes back and forth, usually quite a few times. You make an offer, they counter. So we may find if the offer is written out, sometimes this is the amount that you've put in here is crossed out quite a number of times because the vendor has rejected your offer, they've put in another offer that you've then rejected, and so it may go back and forth 2 or 3 times. Each one of those times has to be fully initialed, but I'll explain that part shortly as well. Settlement date. So this is the date that we actually want to settle on the property, i.e. the day that the property is legally transferred into your name. This is definitely worth consideration and talking with your Voyage broker about, because this is going to depend on your finance approval. It's going to depend on the market conditions. It's going to depend on the lender that we've gone with. It's going to depend on whether we've got a pre-approval or not. Typically, we might look at 21 days for approval or 28 days. That's industry standard. We could also negotiate on a specific date here. So if there's a date that is good for you because your lease is ending, or a date that is good for the vendor because they're moving out of their property or they're purchasing a new property, it's up for negotiation. But if you're unsure, just ask your Voyage broker on this one. Okay, property chattels. Property chattels are generally considered as property that is movable, assets inside the property that are movable. So typical chattels might be dishwashers, window treatments, stuff that you can relatively easily move. If you're walking through a property and you just love the way that they've furnished it and you're wanting to keep all that, then you can put that in here. Obviously talk to the agent, but you can actually include that in the offer if you want to. So anything that's movable that you're like, I love the fridge, it just fits perfectly. That couch is phenomenal. Whatever it is, you can arrange that. You can include that in the contract. It's all negotiable. All right, down here is a pretty important part. The finance clause is or is not applicable. Now, if you're talking to a broker, usually the finance clause is applicable. So we almost always want to make sure that this one is ticked. The lender, you can keep this area blank, or you can put in Voyage, or you can put in a particular lender that we have discussed or that you've got pre-approvals with. This doesn't really matter that much. It's not, the vendor and the real estate agent are not going to get angry or decline the offer if we said that we're getting finance with Commonwealth Bank and then we end up getting finance with Westpac. They don't care. They just want to make sure that the finance is approved. So this part doesn't really matter so much. Latest time, this is really important. So this is definitely worth discussion with your broker as well. 21 days from offer acceptance is pretty standard. Could be 28 days. It could be a set date. Again, this really just depends. Definitely have a chat to the broker about what's best to put in here. And then the amount of the loan, just the amount that you've discussed. So again, this part here, the latest time and the amount, definitely worth talking through because there's a bunch of variables that I can't cover in this video. Okay, further on down, special conditions. In an ideal world, usually the special conditions that we're wanting to go for are the pest and building inspection. So wanting to make sure that the property is in a decent structural condition before we actually purchase it. In an ideal world, we would be able to completely customize the special conditions, especially for the building inspection and the pest inspection, in a way that completely benefits us. So again, in an ideal world, we would be able to decline the offer or not proceed with the offer if a building inspection came back that had anything wrong with it at all. So if there was anything that we don't like. Unfortunately, that is not the world that we live in, and increasingly with in a rising market, we have to somewhat just accept what the real estate agent gives us. So the real estate agent here will typically refer to additional annexures. One of those additional annexures is going to be the pest and building inspection. Really importantly with pest and building inspections, it's important to note that they are worded in such a way that usually more protects the seller than it does the buyer. So the building inspection annexure typically looks like a building inspection has to be done within 7 days or 14 days of offer acceptance. And you've got a right to exit the contract if there is anything structurally wrong with the property. Now, one of the most common things that we hear is that building inspection has come back and they might be a little bit of flooding in the bathroom, or a little bit of maybe like a fence has fallen down a little bit, or maybe there's a strut in the roof, I forget what they're called because I'm not a builder, not a tradie at all, that's maybe a little bit cracked, or there's something with the property. And no matter whether you're purchasing a new property or an old property, there is almost always going to be something wrong with it. The thing is though, those are not structural issues and they don't necessarily give you a reason or a way out of the contract if you suddenly don't want to proceed. So unless it's like there's an internal wall falling down, or the balcony is falling off, or I've seen one where the property was literally starting to slide down the hill, that sort of stuff is structural, you can exit the contract. But with things like there's a cracked tile in the bathroom, or some shelves have been put in wonky, or this door handle is a bit dodgy, or there's some seepage through the property somewhere, that sort of stuff is not structural. We can negotiate on that to say, look, like this is not an acceptable condition, but you can't let that hold you up from actually buying the property because, number one, it's the contract, the annexure doesn't allow that. As I said, especially in a rising market, when there's lots of competition, the more conditions that we put that are beneficial to us, the less attractive and appealing that is to the vendor and the agent. So we've just got to accept what they give us. All right, if you're buying a strata or an apartment, there's probably going to be lots of other special conditions in here. Or if you're buying off the plan, there's going to be a whole heap, and that's almost worth an entirely separate video. But the most important one here is the pest and building inspection. There will be additional annexures, and as I said, we can't really do much about what they present us there. We've got to accept it. Okay, so further on down, you'll see subject to finance. We've got to use our best efforts. So do not make an offer on a property unless you're really certain that you want it. That's hopefully pretty straightforward. Once you're done with all of this, the agent is going to ask you, it might be via DocuSign, but they're going to ask you to sign it. So you're going to be asked to put in your name. You can sign it. Usually DocuSign is fine. They may require a witness there as well, and the date. And they're also then going to ask you to sign a bunch of other stuff down here. Strata disclosures, all those bits and pieces. Another important part, probably the most important part down here, is the conveyancer. You don't need a settlement agent yet. We can advise you on who to use, so you can just put TBA. If you do have a settlement agent, that's fine, you can put them in, but usually it's just a TBA, and we figure that out after the offer's been accepted. So the agent's going to ask you to accept this, and then they're going to send it to the seller to see if they accept. Now, usually by the time we're actually putting a formal offer in, the seller knows that there's an offer coming in. They know what the amount is. Usually this stuff it's all pre-negotiated. And so the seller will then just sign, and then the offer is in full force, and we've then got the amount of days that we specified up here to go and get finance approved. If there's a number of offers in on the property and the seller feels like negotiating, or maybe thinks that they can get an extra 15, 20 grand or whatever it is, then they may come back with another offer. Again, usually this negotiation process is done prior to, but it can happen in the actual formal offer as well. So that is where there may be this amount crossed out, a new amount put in, and each time this is changed, it has to be initialed by all parties. So the offer is in full force once there's no further changes to the document, everything is initialed. You should definitely be letting us know during this process that you're in the process of making an offer, and then we'll be getting everything ready in the background. But once this is all done, you need to then send it through to us, and then we will start with the finance approval. Okay, I'm going to skip through this part because we've gone for long enough already, but just so that you're understanding where we are in the timeline, we've made a formal offer, we've negotiated on that property, the offer has been accepted, and now we need to ensure that we've got finance approval within the date. Given that you'll be corresponding with your broker, by the time we've got the offer accepted, we should know roughly how long it's going to take with the lender that we've selected to get finance approved. If we don't have pre-approval, then we've got to get your income documents, we've got to get your assets, your liabilities, your work history, where you've lived, all of those bits and pieces into our system, and we've got to get you to sign documents. If you do have a pre-approval, then you would have been through that process. We may be needing to send updated income documents through, but the broker will just let you know, or the broker and the broking team will let you know what you need. I should actually say here as well that if you need assistance with the offer, we do have buyer's agents who are willing to work with you to make sure that that offer is all put together correctly, that you're not overpaying for the property, and that you're not missing out as well. I understand most people only go through this 2 or 3 times in their life. It can be pretty stressful. You're quite often dealing with agents who are very good and have been in the game for a long time. Having someone who isn't us, we're pretty good, we can give you a certain amount of help, but the really intricate details on offers and negotiations is better handled by someone who's actually doing that every day. So we can help put someone in your corner. There will be a cost for it, but have a chat to us if that's something that you're interested in. Okay, so talking about the finance approval, we will then be getting your finance approved. So we're now down here. We want to make sure that nothing happens and that your finance and approval settlements, everything goes through perfectly. Every once in a while, something just comes up. So documents go missing, the bank misses a signature, the documents get lost in the mail. Very occasionally we'll miss something, but that doesn't happen because our team is really good and our processes are very defined. Post-approval surprises we will try and minimize as much as possible, and I hope that you're not one, but probably 1 in every 20 or 1 in every 15, something happens, and it's usually something to do with the bank missing documents, a contract not being signed properly, something picked up in the myriad of paperwork, like all the paperwork that needs to go into getting an offer accepted and a property settled and transferred and finance approved. It is not common, but it is also not uncommon for just something to be missed in that process. Usually it's not our fault. Usually it's something to do with the bank missing a document, but if that happens, we will deal with it. We are very experienced with ensuring that stuff goes through and just handling any potential issues. We need to get finance approved within the date that we've said. We need to get the building inspections done. Usually that's the most urgent thing once an offer is accepted, because usually there's a time frame for us to be able to get back to the agent to say, hey, there's an issue with the property that we need to talk about. 5 or 6 days, we need to make sure, we've usually got 5, 6, 7 days, we need to make sure that we get onto a building inspection straight away. If you need ideas or who to use, referrals, then just have a chat to us, we'll get that sorted. And then settlements and conveyancing. So we as the brokers, we are in charge of getting the finance approved. A settlement agent or a conveyancer is an additional person we need to bring in. They're a separate professional and they are licensed to actually officially transfer the property from the seller's name into your name. So there's a settlement agent or a conveyancer that works on your side for you that you hire, usually about $1,200, $1,300 plus additional costs. Then there's also a settlement agent or a conveyancer that works on the seller's side. And those two professionals work together to ensure that on the day of settlement, everything is transferred across legally and correctly. So they're going to do a bunch of title checks. They're going to get you to sign a bunch of documents as well. Once your offer is accepted, if you don't have a conveyancer, then we can put you in touch with one. We've got several that we've used for many years who are really good. And they will get you to sign a bunch of documents. They've got transfer of titles. They've got a whole separate thick sheath of documents that they will need to take you through. So once we have your offer accepted, we're going to send that off to the lender along with any additional finance documents. The lender is going to get a valuation audit on your property, and sometimes we can do that on their behalf. So we'll get that done to ensure that the amount that you've offered is roughly within market value. Once the bank is happy with everything, they're going to approve the loan. We will let you know the really good news. If there are any further issues, then they're going to contact us with what else they need. We'll often just deal with stuff in the background because quite often the approval teams or the credit officers at lenders, they misinterpret things, they don't understand things properly. Sometimes we have to school them on their own policy, which is fun. We try and shield you from as much of that as possible, but we may come back to you asking for an additional income document, clarification on ID or work history or living history or something along those lines. Again, we'll try and shield you from that as much as possible. We're going to get that finance approved. Once the finance is approved, there are going to be a bunch of documents to sign. We'll get that done for you. Most of those are online. Sometimes we can get someone to come and sit down in front of you, or we can sit down with you as well if you're wanting some assistance with that. Once all that goes back to the bank, we'll ensure that the bank is ready. In the meantime, we're having a chat to conveyancers. They sent out a bunch of documents to you. You've signed all those, you've sent them back, and they're doing their work with the settlement agent on the other side. And that is the entire offer process. There are some intricacies and some sort of variations, but that's pretty much what we're looking at. We're wanting to make sure that we've got good preparation. We're wanting to ensure that the offer and negotiation is clean and clear and structured properly, and that you're comfortable with the process as you're going through it. And then once the offer is accepted, we want to make sure that there are no post-approval surprises and that everything flows on to settlement. If there's anything that you don't understand or anything that is confusing, please have a chat to your Voyage broker. They would be more than happy to talk you through anything that wasn't clear. Good luck, happy hunting, and we look forward to getting you into your home.